Welcome to INNErchamber Connections. This is our series of pre-concert chats that we're creating to share insight into each one of our programs this season. My name is Andrew Chung. I'm the violinist and artistic director of INNErchamber, and joining me today are a number of people. He needs no introduction. We've got Ben Bolt Martin. He's a cellist, arranger, composer, and founding member of INNErchamber. We've got Emily Hamper on piano joining us shortly. And then right now we've got Timothy Corlis, composer of the first piece on our program. Hello, Tim.
Hi. Wow, you're starting with it.
We are starting with it.
Okay,
I think
that'll
we're
that'll
starting with it.
wake everyone up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, Tim is joining us all the way from Galiano Island in BC, and we are so pleased you can join us today. Um, So if I can just take a couple minutes just to share some information about Tim. Um, so I'm just going to read here. Timothy Corlis, his compositions have been performed across Canada to critical acclaim. He's been nominated for a Juno Award for Best Classical Composition of the Year. His works have often been performed abroad, including a 2015 premiere by the Elora Festival Singers at Carnegie Hall. In the media, he has been described as a composer of great depth and passion, not to mention a pristine, polished craft. So Tim holds an MA in social and political thought and a Master's of Music and a DMA of Music that he received from UBC. He has held faculty positions at Canadian Mennonite University in Winnipeg and Conrad Grebel University College at University of Waterloo. And it's so neat that by the miracle of technology, you're joining us live today. So we've got this concert coming up. It's called The Search. It's on October 18th. And the way that this program came about was that Emily and Ben and I had wanted to perform Brahms's first piano trio for some time, and we needed something to pair it with. Ben immediately suggested your composition, Tim, Western Projections, which was recorded, a CD release, and Ben appeared on that recording. And when I listened to it, I thought, wow, this is a fantastic fit. We're calling it The Search. So, in both cases, there is a search going on. Brahms, we have an older composer who came back to this composition. He wrote it in his 20s, and then he came back to it 36 years later to revise it. And then in your work, Tim, that's what I want to know today. What was your search for this piece of music, and just to take us through that path. By the way, would you ever come back to a piece 36 years later and rewrite it?
No, I don't think so.
That was not a trick question.
Western Projections is old now too. I mean, almost 15 years old, and so it's almost as old as Brahms. And you look back on what you did over a decade ago, and you think, oh, is that the same person? I don't even recognize who that was. But the title speaks to the searching part. Western Projections is kind of a weird title, but what I was trying to get at with that, which I didn't even realize I was saying at the time, I just kind of the title actually was just sort of two words that sounded good together, so I kind of thought, oh, that sounds neat. But the whole idea as the piece continued. Incidentally, that I did rewrite it at one point. I'd had a first version of it, which was in, I think, 2006, and then I rewrote it, for the CD, like especially the last movement. So the last movement I added about almost 5 minutes, I think, to 4 minutes to the end of it. But the Western Projections title is, at the time I was spending a lot of energy artistically trying to sort out where I belonged. And, I just recently done my master's degree at University of Toronto, and it's a very stimulating environment to study in. And you're trying to figure out who you are, what is the style that you're going to adapt, and are you going to be a modernist composer? Are you going to be a minimalist composer? Are you going to you can write music for film and so on, right? And I still don't know where I fit.
Right.
But the Western Projections title was just sort of thinking about, there's all these things that we hear and experience that are different from what's, what we identify as our own culture. And sometimes, we hear that stuff and experience art from another culture, and we see something of ourselves in it. And sometimes that's a really positive thing. And, there's some part of you that hasn't been expressed, and you realize, oh wow, that art from China or, from Sudan, strikes me, and there's something in me that I didn't think about before, when I look at that. But it can also be, in a negative way, right? Like I think about the Cold War and, how much, how many negative images were projected, from the West to the, communist regime in Russia. And if you've ever been to Russia, I mean, I haven't, but people I've talked to say it's very beautiful. And so obviously, we project things in both ways. So this piece, has both in it. But it's
so it's a searching of your own for your own style at that point in time as a composer, and then you're thinking what elements to bring in, like what what other elements. Like I hear of different cultural musics in here than what we would consider European classical sound.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's European classical sounds, but also a lot of sounds from the Middle East. And I mean, the time that it was written was not too long after 9/11. And I don't think any artist on the planet could work without that in the air. It was, very charged period time. And so, I had always had an interest in music from the Middle East, and just, I love the sound of it, and it has a way of grabbing your emotional, you just feel it in your gut, and so I wanted to sort of do something that might have that same kind of emotional, gut-wrenching sort of, sounds that come out of it. I mean, the one building block that is the most prominent is the augmented second, which I don't know if this will sound very good on the call, but right, that's the descending augmented second, and we're used to hearing that in the minor scale, harmonic minor scale. But at the time I was discovering that how many other beautiful scales there are that use it in a different way, right? I mean, if you start with it, right, you get a scale that's very common in Middle Eastern music, right? So yeah, so that appears in the piece often, that kind of like, yeah.
And then there's a real improvised quality to a lot of the instrumental lines. There's like great kind of rhapsodic, violin and cello melodies at times, and I hear that. Is there also Indian influences, or is it more Middle Eastern?
Yeah, actually, I lived in India when I was younger, like in the 90s, or not for a long time, for a year, and the influence of India is always in the music I've written. But the opening movement, especially, you're talking about, where you have these big, banging chords, and then the violin improvises, and your line is very free. So that feels a little bit like a raga. It kind of has it's a very harsh raga, but it could, you could easily imagine, a Hindustani singer improvising those lines that you play.
Hey, Tim, I'm going to ask you a question because I'm here on the call and I haven't said anything yet. So what I'm going to do, the question I'm actually quite interested in having you share with us is, obviously you've talked about how you have a real deep interest in bringing world music influences or connecting to world music influences in your music. What's your feeling about sort of what Western classical music has to contribute to the world music or the world cultural what kind of influences does it have on the world culture?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a question I've thought quite a bit about. At the time that I wrote Western Projections, I was squarely embedded in, the context of a Western education. And although I had spent some time in India, and lived amongst people who were part of a different musical tradition for a short time, most of my training was, Western classical music. More recently, I've branched out into experiences that kind of broke that bubble, which I'm very grateful for. And one of those experiences was working in a music store, managing a music store on Granville Island in Vancouver called Gandharva World Music Instruments. Incidentally, that name, it means the celestial sounds or the voices of the celestial musicians, Gandharva. Anyway, being surrounded by all these instruments from around the world and learning about them and being surrounded by people who are part of other traditions, it just becomes very clear that your knowledge, coming from a Western musical perspective is just tiny. Like it's the smallest iota of understanding about the music that's out there. And, one of the things that becomes clear when you're in that context is that the term world music doesn't make any sense. There was one concert that I participated in where we had musicians from all different traditions. And I was in a rehearsal standing beside a musician from Ecuador. And we were listening to a Hindustani singer practicing. And the musician from Ecuador turned to me and said, "Oh, I really like how you've incorporated all the world music into this." Of course, not thinking of his own contribution as world music, right? Thinking that, oh, well, he's part of the mainstream, right? And I turned to him and I said, "We're all world music. You're world music. I'm world music too." And it was kind of an eye-opening moment for both of us and we kind of laughed about it. It's like, duh. But it's remarkable how a term like that has so much ignorance surrounding it, but we use it all the time, right?
All the time. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because it's I think in Western music and in concert series we use world music and we draw on elements of world music and we do it with INNERchamber too to try to just give different colors, different perspectives and but at the same time we have to recognize that squarely that the music that we play as part of a Western music tradition is just really one piece of the entire puzzle, and each of them have such incredibly deep musical traditions, and each of the like Hindustani music and absolutely the different things that we encounter, but we have to do it with a authenticity, I suppose, and attempt to, and maybe it's just the spirit of how we approach it, and maybe that's the way that that we go there.
That's exactly it. Yeah, I agree with that. The intent is key, and this piece struggles with that. There's a lot of struggle in this piece. The second movement, for example, which is very fast, and devilishly hard to play, to keep it all together. Like there's lots of counterpoint and the seams can come apart at any moment.
It says frantic at the top of that particular.
Yeah, frantic, exactly. That's right. Frantic in a very rigid font, but and I understand that your audience is receiving like a catered meal delivered or something like that. So just make sure that no one drinks a big gulp of coffee or something right before this movement.
That's right. Very shocking.
Yeah, but this scale, it's like it's almost like someone you know, that it starts with that, and it's almost like someone's trying to push a boulder up a hill. You know, it's like, oh, I got it. No, I don't. Wait, no, okay. Oh, there we go. You know, and this is like the beginning of this scale where I was talking about the augmented second. You know, at the you know, like the root of the scale and the second degree is a minor second as opposed to a major second, which we're used to. So I was exploring that, and for me, you know, this was a big struggle. I'm venturing into a new territory, and I have to like learn about it, and represented that by saying, okay, well, I'm going to learn a little bit about the scale, and then as the movement progresses, the scale, you know, continues upward, right? You know, like, and so on, right? Yep. And you know, by the end of the movement, you finally hear the whole scale. And the scale, incidentally, is not the same each octave, right? Mm-hmm. So you know, you can, why have a scale that's just an octave, right? You could have it, so this scale actually goes over 2 octaves.
Right. Got it.
Yeah. Huh. So that is sort of represents the struggle, right? You know, to kind of like push a little further, you know, towards whatever it is that you're trying to learn, or you know, expand yourself a little bit.
I love it. You know, just quickly, because we're running out of time, but sure. Just in 1 minute, take me back to 2009. This wasn't just a composition project for you. This was also a recording project for all of you, right? And out of this recording, as I understand it, you were nominated for a Juno Award for, I believe it was Best Classical Composition. Is that what we call it? I want you guys to just kind of reminisce 30 seconds of what that was like, that recording project.
Well, to me, let me start, because I you know, just for me, it was a really, I mean, it was a formative sort of 2 feet in project that made me start to sort of feel like a grown-up, I guess. You know, it is like at some point, I guess all of us have to move from being students to being musicians, you know, and that, to me, that was the start of the process for me, that felt like, hey, I'm being a musician here. I'm not just parroting what someone else has given me. And the fact that it was all new music from someone that I knew was really an incredibly formative part of that, was that I felt like, hey, I'm giving something to the world that's never been there before, you know, and that really made me feel like I was starting out on some path. Anyway, I'll start with that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, to answer your question about looking back, I just feel incredibly grateful that the piece is still being performed. Mm-hmm. It's, you know, it's been performed a few times, but it's so devilishly hard that people rarely take it on. The process of making the recording demonstrated that. I remember Heather Taves, who was the pianist at the time. She said, I just did a CD of the entire Chopin literature, and this is harder than anything I learned on that CD.
She said that in the most complimentary of fashions, I'm sure.
Yeah, I guess so. But I mean, she played it. But you know, there's one section especially for the pianist for Emily at the end of the first movement that is just a very fast, you know, agile, you know, decorative pattern that, you know, really is very difficult. Mm-hmm. So anyone, but not just the pianist. I mean, the violin parts are virtuosic. It goes stratospherically high at the end, and you have to, you know, play these like ridiculously high notes with totally exposed, and
they're pretty high. They're pretty exposed.
And I mean, the cello has this role really as an anchor to drive the whole piece, because the third movement has this extended cello solo, and it builds and builds. So
I guess, you know, I guess that bringing it into the recording space, you got to just feel how your piece sat with the musicians, whether it was easy, whether it was difficult, and then trying to kind of you know, capture that on a recording it's always such a different process, but one that's, you know, revealing and you know, gives you a deeper appreciation of your piece and of course of the players and the process. I think that's a wrap today for you know, our time with you, Tim. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
all the way from Galliano Island. It's fantastic. I'm really looking forward to this next week. And through the miracle of video magic, we're now going to lose you, and then Emily's going to come onto this call in a matter of seconds.
And just before you do that,
Yes.
I just wanted to express my sincere thanks for what you've done to prepare this piece. It's obviously many hours of practicing and rehearsal to put this together. So thank you.
My pleasure. It's what we do. It's what we do, and I've so enjoyed rehearsing it thus far. So looking
Thanks
forward to next
thanks
week.
for your work, Tim, and it was great to see you again.
Okay. All right.
Great.
All the best then. Bye-bye.
Great. And through the miracle of video technology, Timothy is replaced by Emily. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you. Hello.
Our pianist in this wonderful program. So we just have a few minutes. So what I wanted to impress upon our viewers is how important the role of the piano is in this configuration. So this is piano trio music. And you know, the piano part is never easy.
No, it isn't.
Right? So what do we think of the role of the piano in this configuration?
The way I see it is it's providing the majority of the harmonic information. Also in especially the first movement and then the second theme of the final movement, a lot of strength melodically. It's a polyphonic instrument, so it can do many things at once. I think at the time that Brahms and Beethoven too were living, the development of the piano was happening so quickly compared to how we see it now. The grand piano was a grand piano, but
it was a lighter instrument, a lighter sound.
It had been a lighter sound. Its capacities were increasing in terms of not only the size of the sound it could make, but the strength of the body of the instrument and the interior and the strength. So composers were able over decades to use it in different ways, and I think they really took advantage of that. Also, we need to remember that before Brahms, so his influence would have been Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, all those composers were absolutely brilliant keyboardists themselves. So they took advantage as well of the development of the instrument and the acceleration of piano technique and training, which was going on probably even during their own lifetimes, or at least, across the generations quite tightly, versus, now all these hundreds of years later, a young pianist has to learn that whole canon sort of as basic training, right?
So it's like the piano's role, it sets the texture, really, of the piece in each of the movements. The violin and the cello, we just do our thing. We kind of play some pretty melodies and this and that and the other. So it sets the texture. It's also a show-off, because all these composers were pianists, essentially, right? So it's a show-off point for them to say, what can I do? Well, look at what I can do. And
look what I can do, look what my instrument can do. It holds up a lot of the structure of the composition itself.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
I know, Ben's been talking about, Brahms's unhealthy admiration for Beethoven, is the way he puts it. And, what do you mean by that?
What do I mean by that? Beethoven was such an idol for Brahms that Brahms actually was kind of, you might say, stunted in his musical growth, because he just was scared to do anything that Beethoven had done in the past for fear of falling short. So, I mean, I was just in regards to this. This trio was very early on in Brahms's development, and so he actually, you can see him sort of copying Beethoven in a lot of ways, and trying to follow in the footsteps of the giant, and so you can kind of experience Brahms's I don't know, a younger brother scenario or something along those lines, that he was really you might say hamstrung a little bit by his admiration for Beethoven, but I guess maybe the process of having having restrictions around your compositional style can be a real inspiration as well. And so I think in a lot of ways, he was really taking what was handed to him in the traditions of particularly Beethoven, but Haydn and Mozart as well. And just, he kept to those boundaries really strictly in this piece. And he ended up writing something that was quite brilliant in the context of that, even though in a lot of ways you can really see him penned in by the strictures that Beethoven had set for him. Anyway, I had a quick question for you, Emily, sort of when you're talking about filling all those roles and being the melody, but also being the harmony, all the things that you have to do when you're playing a piece like this. How do you feel like your brain is functioning differently from, like, a lot of the time you spend collaborating with singers and playing along, in opera settings and stuff like that. How does your brain feel differently in a situation like this?
I was just thinking about that before coming onto this call, actually. So people may or may not know that when I was studying at UBC, I did a lot of chamber music, and I had been collaborating with other instrumentalists in my teams as well. I turned to vocal music in my sort of early to mid 20s and left chamber music behind for a while. And over the last, few months of learning this repertoire, because it does take me months to learn this stuff, I reflected that if you think about collaborative pianists and what we do, it's quite rare that people do equal amounts of vocal and chamber or opera coaching and chamber music. And there's a good reason for that, which is partly the specialization of just learning so much about the vocal repertoire that ends up being what people are asking me to do, but also just in terms of the demands pianistically. There are some art song accompaniments, including some by Brahms, that are very challenging, difficult. Richard Strauss, also Hugo Wolf, Ravel, but they're short. They don't last half an hour, 40 minutes per piece. So you can get through them quicker. And of course, with the orchestral reductions, pianists have the option of not playing all the notes. We get to pick and choose. It's not piano music. A lot of times it's very awkward to accommodate in the hands. And so we make our choices. But when I'm faced with pieces like the Brahms Trio or Timothy's piece, I have an obligation to render it as precisely as possible. So where my brain goes is suddenly the scale of the work in terms of its length and architecture, perhaps, which is that much bigger. It's like learning an entire symphony, basically. Then versus learning a song, and learning a complete opera would be a similar scale. But again, I can make some choices about what I care to execute or how I do it occasionally. So it's a definitely full-on brain experience. I need lots of protein.
And if people want to hear this, you got to join us on October the 18th. This is live from Revival House. This is our season opener. It's called The Search. We've got Western Projections by Timothy Corlis, and we've got Brahms' Piano Trio No. 1. Please check us out. Visit INNERchamber.ca for more information. Thank you so much to you two for joining me on this journey of this particular concert and for our chat today. Thank you.
Thanks.
You guys.
Bye.